TPR.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 123 of the TPR pod. Today's episode is with a very interesting guy called Sparsh Ahuja. Sparsh is a photographer, filmmaker, journalist, documentarian. He has this specialization with regards to his current project that he's working on that we spoke of and about, which is called Project Dastaan. Project Dastaan is this project that he has co-founded along with a few other very cool people, where the initial aim was to bring together people who had migrated from India to what is now Pakistan, from what is now Pakistan to what is left of India at the time of the partition, and connecting them with their homes, going across the border, making like a VR film and then showing it to the people who had moved, just as a memory of the home that they had. And it's grown from there to encompass more and more facets of the partition, and in a way also focus on the similarities between the cultures and how they continue to exist even after they have been moved from their original location to somewhere else. So there's a podcast I'm going to link in the description. Apart from, you can go to the website of Project Dastaan, also in the description. But the podcast has him and Sam, another one of the co-founders. They talk about Project Dastaan in much more detail. It's from last year. That's when they were raising money. They were planning to do a lot of things. In this episode, we don't talk as much about Project Dastaan as about Sparsh himself. And both of us, we discuss a lot of things around identity, what it means to be, an Indian or a Pakistani person, or a Desi origin person, perhaps, who's living outside of Pakistan, the relationship with India, Pakistan, the homeland. We talk about his trip. He made a trip to his ancestral village in Pakistan, how that went, what the process was, and a lot of the aims as well of Project Dastaan, what he's hoping to accomplish. Does he expect backlash? It's a great episode, and I think if you're interested in stories of the partition and stories of the people who moved across during the partition, I think there's a lot of nuanced information in this episode, and obviously in the work that Project Dastaan is doing, that you will be very interested in as well. So yeah, we continue to pull at this thread of stories of India, Pakistan, partition. Hopefully we'll get to Bangladesh as well, and it continues to be a source of great conversations that we're having. But yeah, Project Dastaan, Sparsh, all these things talked about, episode 123. So I thought I'd give you a bit of background as to why I've been pestering you for several months, and how that mental journey of mine has progressed. So what happened was, I saw that Anchal Malhotra, she shared your picture from when you had been to Pakistan. You had visited, and I was like, oh, hey, this might be interesting. Indian guy visits Pakistan. Let's just, talk about that. And I had no idea about, in my ignorance, about, the Nat Geo stuff, Project Dastaan. I didn't know any of that. And before I started digging, so like a couple of months ago, when I started, researching, quote unquote, then I saw all of that, Project Dastaan stuff, your other podcast that you did on PG Radio, I think it was last year, maybe.
Oh, with Brucker and Sam.
Yes, with Sam, yeah. Went through all of that. I was like, cool, that's all the questions I would have had. That's all finished.
Yeah.
So, I thought I'm still gonna focus on your trip to Pakistan in this little while. But I thought that have you done many updates on Project Dastaan since the podcast last year?
I mean, there's always people are like, always interested in asking for news about partition story. Who did you reconnect? So just the usual, like the people. Usually, it's more about like Project Dastaan, the VR connections, and yeah, that's what journalists tend to be
Okay.
really interested in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I read a few things that you had that had been written about you, that you had spoken to for Dawn, and a couple other magazines. But these are all getting further and further back in like the past couple of years.
Yeah.
So why I thought it would be interesting also to speak to you was through the podcast and speaking to Anchal. I've sort of had this weird awakening of interest in my mind, with
Yeah.
regards to, I'm a bit too low now, sorry, with regards to the partition and history and identity. But before we get into that, I want to ask a few questions about yourself, before we get to this part. You mentioned
Yeah.
in the previous podcast that you grew up in Australia, was it?
Yeah. I grew up in Melbourne. So
Okay.
I was born in Delhi.
Okay.
I lived there until I was 3 or 4, and then my parents moved to San Francisco.
Okay.
And that was a computer engineer with HP at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's with the Salvation Army now in Australia.
Oh.
Yeah, he
Okay.
was working in software engineering. So yeah, stayed there in near San Jose since I was until I was 6. Then we moved to Australia. Yeah, I basically grew up there. Went back to India every couple of years because the rest of my family's still in Delhi. And then I came to the UK for my undergrad around 5 years back.
And you've been in the
And
UK since?
well, like roughly, I mean, I spent 3 years obviously studying while I was here.
Yeah.
But that was only half the year because holiday ended up being so, UK has 3 terms of 2 months each. And so, I'd go back to Australia, I'd spend a bunch of time in India, traveled a fair bit. And then after I graduated, I went, back to India.
Mm.
Spent the last couple of years there. And yeah, I just came back to the UK now.
Mm.
Yeah.
Why I was asking was, I've sort of grown up. I'm Pakistani technically, but
Yeah.
I haven't grown up only in Pakistan. I've spent
Yeah.
most of my life in the Middle East, in like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and then I've
Yeah.
been here for 5, 6 years, and I've only spent about 10 years in Pakistan. And over the past few years, I was wondering about, um, maybe it's just an exposure to people like you know Anchal and the work that you guys are doing and stuff like that. It sort of became a question about identity.
Mm.
So where am I from, what is home, that sort of stuff. And I feel like I don't have a fixed answer for that anymore. I was
Yeah.
curious, there are a lot of Pakistanis who leave Pakistan.
Mm.
Their families leave for like better economic opportunities, etc. That doesn't seem to be the case in your scenario, right?
Then my parents left India for better economic
Okay.
opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah, I was quite young, I
Right.
mean, I didn't uh I didn't sign the Australian citizenship form, my parents did.
Right.
So I've never really had that identity like it is what it is.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
yeah, I enjoy
No,
being
it's also because since I've been doing the podcast, I've been speaking to a lot of Pakistani like internet content creator type
yeah,
people. And it's I feel like a gap in the amount I can relate to people who are fully 100% Pakistani, zero to where they are right now.
yeah,
And that's sort of what I was wondering, how when you first went back to India, like, we'd go back to Pakistan in the holidays in summer
yeah,
holidays.
yeah,
And it would
yeah,
be
yeah,
like, family lives there, we went there, but now we come back, we live in Dubai. Then I lived in
yeah,
Pakistan for a stretch for 10 years.
yeah.
Was India different for you when you went back for an extended period of time as an adult versus holiday trips?
Yeah, because I mean, when I was going on my holiday trips, I would just spend time with like my grandparents
Yeah.
and uncles and cousins, and so I never really, we used to take trips, but it was like, chalo aaj, like we'll go to Agra, or like
Mm.
little like trips around the place, Shimla chalte hain,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
things
yeah.
like that. When I went back and I was, I lived by myself and traveled wherever we picked up stories. I just kind of went, and I did a lot of like solo travel as well. Like I spent a couple of months in Ladakh. That was my
Mhm.
first. Yeah, it was different for sure. I think I like, got to know the place a lot better. And um, I wouldn't say reconnected with my roots. I don't want to call it that. I think diaspora make a really big deal out of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I just got to know the place. I think I got to know. It's just like living anywhere, to be honest. You know, a matter of time. Spent more time there than any
Right.
other
Right.
previous. So
It's I'm
yeah,
glad you said the thing about that you didn't really feel like this eye-opening reconnection, mango juice in my veins kind of thing that I read about on the internet. Like it's just
I think it's really overhyped.
yeah.
You know, like I this is what I always say to my like all my other diaspora friends, like, oh, when I go back, when people say, I come here, like I'm in a foreign country in the UK, Australia, America.
Mm,
I don't feel American. I don't look like anyone here. Um, people don't really accept me, but racism is a huge issue. So that I'm not discounting any of that. And they'll say things like, when I go back to Pakistan or India, or Bangladesh, people don't feel like people don't treat me like I belong there either. They think I'm
yeah.
like an American.
Yeah.
Uh, um, they don't kind of respect that I'm also like as much as cultured. And I don't think so on one hand, I can accept the racism argument. I think that's completely valid. But this is my personal opinion, is when diaspora go back to the motherland or the
Hmm.
homeland, I don't think it's, you know, people there are like culturally feeling like culturally you don't belong. I think it's a class thing. Like you've
Sure.
come back and now your pocket money is, more than, your cousin's like monthly salary, right? Of course they're not gonna like think of you as like you don't belong from here. Like that's
Right.
kind of the way and that's not to say that people have like massively jumped class barriers, but it's just purchasing power of currency at the end of
Yeah.
the day.
Yeah.
You're earning in dollars and you're coming back and spending in rupees, and then you're saying, "Oh, people don't treat me like I belong." Or like, you're like a Nawab now. Of course, people aren't gonna.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think it's a huge identity thing
And
as
also
much as
perhaps there's a
I
lot
think
of
it's a class
like
thing. I think it's a class thing.
cultural stuff that you've just been different with. Like you grew up with, even
Yeah,
just with TV and movies. In
exactly.
India, Pakistan, it's a different thing. Like so
Yeah,
many people in Pakistan are hooked onto like Bollywood stuff, and
yeah,
Pakistan doesn't have a lot of its own, but there are
yeah,
Pakistani shows and stuff, which I never saw. So
yeah,
I'm constantly missing those references because when I was a teenager, they were watching it. I
yeah.
wasn't in Pakistan. So maybe that's it. What's
And that's also fine, like if you go to like Spain and you've missed, you didn't grow up in Spain, you're like, oh my God, they didn't accept me as Spanish,
yeah,
Of course they didn't. Like I mean I went to India and every 2 years for 2 months. And
yeah.
like I'm not offended when people in India are like, oh yeah, like you're like a whitewashed Desi. Like to an extent I am, like I grew
Yeah.
up over. That's not something that I'm gonna feel like, "Ah, my God, they're not accepting me."
Yeah,
And
there's also, at
I
least
got
in Pakistan, there's a lot of like, I don't know if propaganda is the right word, but it seems to me, again, this is just my personal opinion. It seems to me that there's a lot of pressure on just being Pakistani, that you have to just
Mm,
absolutely, there's one form of Pakistani and that's what you should strive towards, even if it's like the country's
yeah,
not doing great.
yeah,
And people, even if they don't consciously agree with that
mm,
inherently, because maybe their parents are from Pakistan and they're like first
yeah,
gen, there's that
yeah.
sort of pressure. What was, when your family moved out, like
Mhm.
what was your, while living in Australia, in the US, and not when you were visiting India, what was your parents' relationship with India? Did they like miss it like super hard and we're just not going to be happy wherever we go, or as
No,
happy?
it was really interesting actually. I think my parents ended up being because we like left, and now suddenly we're like kind of at the start at least surrounded by foreign culture before we started assimilating a little
Yeah.
bit. um I think my parents adopted like we're going to be more Indian than we ever were back in India.
Yeah.
So back when my cousins were like, you know going out and eating at malls and doing all of the, I mean, westernized, I guess, like I'm going to put it in quotes. It's just like the way India developed,
Yeah.
it went that route. And my parents were like 3 times a week Monday, because they're trying to like hold on to that. Like, this is the India we left. And, while they were out in Australia, India had kind of changed, it's not the same like that anymore. But like for my parents, it became like, let's like protect, everything we left behind. And it became a little bit of like cultural and especially religious, like essentialism. And
Yeah.
so I grew up in a very religiously conservative household until I was about like, 16, 17, where I started feeling, I'm not really down for this. Like, this is not who I am.
Yeah.
That's how I think it like kind of affected my parents. It was also like, you know, like when you're confused about your identity, some people like will forget it altogether and try to be white. That's I see a lot of that
Yes.
happening in in diaspora, and some people will just like kind of hone in and like you know and like look, it's great that like you're keeping in touch with your culture, but
Mm.
like it's fine to listen to like Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan one day and rap the next day. Like that's
Yeah.
no like
Yeah.
it's not like a this is pure and this isn't and like this is authentic and this I feel
Yeah.
like all of these terms have like as you said like people present it as like this is my identity, but underlying that like discussion there's like a you should be doing this and this is
Yeah.
what real Indian is.
There's a
This is
moral angle. Yeah.
the moral angle, and I've never really like um yeah, I don't vibe well with the moral angle types.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then, so your family was from Delhi. That's where you guys were initially from.
yeah,
And
as in
then,
initially from as in my parents were born in Delhi, I was born in Delhi, and my
yeah.
little brother was born in Melbourne.
Right.
But my grandparents were born in like West Punjab, now in
Yeah.
Pakistan.
Dear Ghazi
Yeah.
Khan, I think you said close to
Yeah, my dada is from Dera Ghazi Khan, and my nana is from it's a village called Bela, but it's near
Bela.
Jan,
Okay.
like near in Attock, Attock
Okay.
basically.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah.
So now with my family, also them being from Delhi, like my dad's side of the family, they were much older, so I never saw my dada dadi as much in this context. And my mom's side, my nani was around, and they're all like famously from Delhi. Her siblings. So there was a lot of discussion around, well, we live in Karachi, and sure we're Pakistani, but we're from fucking Delhi, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I grew up. And my nani was 8 when the partition happened, and she left, and she was the youngest, so all her siblings were older. They'd seen more of Delhi, spent time there. Was There was a lot of discussion around that fact, India as well, and there's also some like alleged Mughal connection. I spoke to Anshul about this, and she was very surprised about my insisting that it was alleged because I was like, look, man, there's lots of people who would like to believe that they're Shah Jahan's son, but maybe not.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Every rickshaw driver in old Delhi will tell you that they're descended from them.
yes,
Uh,
yes.
you know, which is
So
probably there's probably a grain of truth to that.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah. Thinking about how the Mughals were, uh, but was that connection? What was when you went back to India, met your grandparents? Was there
Mhm.
much mention of the home that was?
No, not that much actually. Like there was like a longing, and then that's why obviously I started this project. There was a
Yeah.
longing to kind of see it again, but I don't think it was like a big part of our family identity. Like we were Punjabi, we're from Delhi,
Hmm.
and it was kind of like, let's forget about all of that. It was in the past. And even though my family can't trace their roots back in Delhi, because obviously, like the whole area, lots of West Delhi is just like not planned. It was refugee camps that then turned into settlements, which then turned into suburbs.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the whole area I come from, they're all partition refugees. And by like the Gurdwara at the end of the street is called Peshori Gurdwara because they're all from Peshawar, like that's all
Right.
back then. So I think there are little like you can sometimes like hear little bits of it in like our family when like um different sides of the family will say to each other, "Oh, like these Multani types, they're like that," and then you think, that's where that comes from that time, but not strongly. Even to the point where, like, my dada is from obviously Dera Ghazi Khan, so like his like native tongue is Derawal, Multani, Saraiki, like that kind of. But he won't say that. He'll say Punjabi because they're trying to really like that identity it got molded into this like Delhi identity, which is quite similar to Lahore actually. When I went to Lahore, is like grandparents have this like, especially around Punjabi communities, grandparents will be like, "Oh, I speak like Saraiki, I speak Multani, I speak Landa, I speak Patwari," all of these kinds of like different dialects. And then the parents will be like, "No, but Punjabi, like, oh, this gets Punjabi." And
Right.
then the grandchildren are like, "Yeah, I can understand it, but I speak Urdu or I speak Hindi, and like my Punjabi is terrible. Like
Right.
I can understand, but I can't speak,
Mm.
and I apply in Hindi." Yeah, my
That's
grandparents.
quite similar. You're right with Lahore because both sides of my family moved from Delhi, and my dad's side was from Amroha, which I think is also close to Delhi, maybe. But they all moved to Lahore, and then the
Yeah.
mom's side continued forward to Karachi. So the
Mm.
dad's side of the family, as far as they're concerned, are Lahori. Yeah, we were
Yeah.
from Delhi, but everyone's like speaks
Yeah.
Punjabi super well, and they're in and out of Lahore. And the
Yeah.
Karachi side of the family, I think because Karachi is so, maybe Karachi because it's so like multicultural and people from
Yeah.
all over come there, it doesn't have its own, like it's not Sindhi, the city. So it doesn't have like that overarching identity which everything gets subsumed into. Um,
It's like I think it's interesting because I mean obviously Delhi has historically been part of Punjab, like Greater Punjab for a
yeah,
long time.
yeah,
But uh, I'd say that Lahore was always historically stronger, the cultural center of Punjab, to the point where like when partition happened in Indian Punjab then needed a capital because like
yeah,
Lahore was
yeah.
there. They built Chandigarh and then obviously there's been uh, the states have been fighting over like whose Chandigarh, whose capital is it? But Delhi to an extent had that more like it's part of Punjab, but it was more like a Mughal city.
Yeah.
So the identity was completely different. So even today, in like you'll see lots of cultural references in India towards Lahore because it's still like this kind of if Punjab was like a united country, Lahore would be the capital.
Yeah.
Delhi's always got this Mughal Mughal influence.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
So I missed out this part perhaps, but my idea, my reference as being like a descendant of people who were refugees was, all right, Sparsh started the Project Dastaan thing with a few other people. His motivation is because his whole family talks about the partition all the time. And he's like, let's
Mm.
investigate. But that's not the case. Your family wasn't obsessing about the partition.
My grandfather, so
Hmm.
like my parents, my uncles, my cousins don't care. Like
Hmm.
they care, but it wasn't
Yeah.
like it's not like talk about it all the time. The first time I heard of Pakistan was I think I was like 8 or 9, and like I had like this world book where you'd get stickers of countries and place them on the map,
Sure.
and it was just like, oh, this is a country called Pakistan, and then my parents were like, oh, but you can't go there. I was like, okay, right, it's that country. But since then, I
Right.
was like, I need to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Of course.
like
Yeah.
what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like I have to go there. But when I had like kind of private time with my grandparents, then they would speak to me about it,
Hmm.
and there was that sense of like longing. So it
Hmm.
wasn't like something that was spoken about like all the time. It was something that I had to like really dig into. Like my nana and I play chess together, and then he'd talk to me about that kind of stuff. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Would you say, like, was there like a vibe of them suppressing it? I'm also, because we were thinking about the moral imperatives of what your identity should be and something. There, when people move to Pakistan, there's a lot of people who move from India to Pakistan, and they're
Mm,
like, we are now Pakistan. This is where our identity is. We chose this, and we will make this our own.
Yeah.
Would you say there was perhaps an element of that which made your grandparents be like, no, no, we're Indian now. Yeah, we were Pakistani, but this is our vibe now, and we'll talk about it, but you'll need to push. Or was it just
So
painful?
it's like it's not we were ever Pakistani.
Yeah,
It's we were that was
sure.
all
Of
India,
course.
like,
Of
you
course.
know.
Yeah, yes, yes, yes.
But,
Sorry.
so there's no element of like we were Pakistani at all.
Hmm.
Um, uh, Even more so, there's this element of Pakistan took that land from
Yeah,
us.
yeah.
You know. Second, I think it wasn't like we chose this; it was we were forced out. Because it's in the Pakistan on the Pakistani side of that national narrative, it's that
Yeah.
this was our self-determination. On the Indian side, for people who lived in those territories, is like this was a forced migration, and we didn't sign up for this.
Yeah.
Um, so, and in terms of like that identity, I think it's because, as in, so my family never were like zamindari type. It's not like we had businesses or any assets that were brought over. We came with like it's really funny, but my great great grandmother, like
Hmm.
her name was Mungfali because we were
Oh,
like, peanut. Like that's
Filipinos.
that peanuts. Like, and my nana was like my great non nana is like they sold lentils like on the side of the street. So like it
Sure.
wasn't like we came with we took a business, and a lot of people just kind of
Yeah.
took that wealth and kind of
Yeah.
kept it. The big industrial families especially. But because we really had just another village, it was like kind of not that much wealth. I think it's
Hmm.
about wealth actually, that there wasn't that much wealth or privilege or culture left behind. That we came here like, we just got to build from scratch. And
Right.
so it was more like, let's build up. And the country was like that as well. Like even India, Pakistan, back in those 50s, 60s, like let's build dams here, let's build big projects, like government sponsored projects. Nehru was all about,
Hmm.
so my family kind of got involved in that, and yeah, it was just like,
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I've never thought about it, and it's weird. In the Pakistani side of the story, we obviously don't talk about the people who lived on what is now Pakistan and went to India. That might as well have never have happened as far as our school stuff is concerned. And the Muslims made the choice and they moved here, etc., etc. So it makes sense from a historical and Indian perspective, a factual perspective, that people who were not Muslim were pushed out,
mm,
essentially.
yeah,
What's the story about, because there's still lots of Muslims in India,
yeah.
and but sort of an equal amount moved across. What's the
Yeah.
vibe as to why did they move?
As in terms of
Like in school books, if you
you mean like,
know.
so I didn't go
Yeah,
school
yeah,
in
yeah,
India, so I
yeah,
can
yeah.
speak on behalf of like what Indian school children are taught. I could talk like, I mean, in terms of general sentiment.
Mm.
Are you talking about the Muslims who stayed back in India or Indian Muslims today, or like the ones who moved to
Like the
Pakistan?
ones who moved to Pakistan, why the ones
Yeah,
who came from what is now Pakistan to India, they're obviously refugees and they were fleeing
yeah,
suffering, which is
yeah,
what our thing was for, why we moved from there. But
yeah.
what's people who are in India and still live there, why did people move from here to Pakistan? What's their general vibe?
So it really depends on where on the political spectrum
Right.
you see this issue, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like the Indian left, right, would probably say something along the lines of like, oh, Muslims feared for their future as minorities in like independent India. So they made the decision to form, their own
Which is
state.
our line as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
But what the Indian left would clarify is like, oh, but that wasn't the right decision, you
Right.
know? Like
Right.
that's whereas like the Indian right would probably say something like, oh, it was like an Islamist separatist movement.
Right. Right.
Like they wanted to, form like yeah, it's like separatism.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
how
yeah. Like they had an opportunity to make their own place and they just took it.
yeah,
There
yeah, and
wasn't really an issue.
they weren't willing to coexist like
Right,
it was
sure.
like Ashraf's chauvinism, like that kind of narrative. From that's like your very BJP narrative, and like
Right.
this is what so Congress would probably say something like, I mean Congress is like kind of center left, but like that's the thing. It's like I think what oh yeah, on one side it's that same narrative that they were fearing for their future as minorities, but this wasn't the way to go about it. Is what
Yeah.
like, yeah, and
Yeah.
basically, two nation theory as a whole is just not very accepted in India. But to an extent, I feel like I fear like as under the BJP that Indian Muslims are starting to um, feel like,
Maybe
oh
that
well,
wasn't such a bad idea.
well, not necessarily. Maybe it wasn't such a
Or
bad idea. It's like it's a really interesting. I think there's a really interesting debate happening now, and there's two ways of looking at it. One is like that the BJP is like vindicating two nation theory, in that like Jinnah was right. These communities could never coexist, and look what's happening to like.
a lot of Pakistani Twitter would love that argument, which is what, yeah,
Yeah, and I've seen that come up on Dawn. I've seen like op-eds.
yeah,
Modi has proved Jinnah correct,
yeah,
right?
which,
Um, That's one way. And the other way of looking at it, which I've seen from Pakistani commentators as well, and like some Indian leftist commentators, is that had had the partition not happened, then these communities would have formed like a counterblock to each other. And
hmm,
so you wouldn't have had the opportunity for people like Modi, for people like Zia, because the communities would have kind of counterbalanced in that way.
yeah,
Obviously, it's far easier for the BJP to come up with this Islamophobic rhetoric when there's only 13% of the country is Muslim. But like
yeah,
what it would have been had the lines not been drawn, uh, they wouldn't have been able to get away with it. So there's really two ways of looking at it.
yeah.
I don't think you can. I don't think I'm in a position to say which one is like right or
Oh
wrong.
no, of course, of course.
Yeah.
And the Pakistani side that says Jinnah was right, hashtag and all that, very
Mm.
conveniently ignore Pakistan's own not very good treatment of our relative minorities. So it's obviously no one's
Yeah.
really being fully rational. But
Yes. In 46, there was a Congress activist called Azad, like Abdul Kalam Azad.
mhm,
And so at the time of partition, he made this argument that minorities would be safe because of hostage theory. He called this like mutually assured hostages, because that if the Muslims were the hostages in India and the Hindus and the Sikhs were the hostages in Pakistan, and no country could afford to oppress its own minorities because the same thing would happen on the
mhm,
other side. And so that would his whole theory was that would prevent in like kind of this nuclear mutually assured
right,
destruction
yeah, yeah,
way. His theory was that would prevent the oppression of minorities. It turns out he got half of that right, which
mm,
was if one would oppress, the other would also oppress, but it didn't lead to none of them. It led to both of them oppressing their minorities, which is kind
yeah,
of what's across, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh now. So, yeah, I feel he only had 50% of that that
yeah,
equation
yeah,
correct.
yeah, yeah.
I'm like highly skeptical of these mutually assured destruction leads to peace arguments. It's just.
Yeah, I mean, people will just go way farther than you expect them to. They're like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
fuck it, we're doing it. It's fine.
yeah.
So then Project Dastan you started, and I'll link to the episode you did with PG Radio, I believe that's her name, you and Sam, and the website. Um, I'm gonna fast forward over all of that, okay,
Mm,
and get to the point where in that previous podcast you said that you were waiting. Sam had been to Pakistan apparently,
mm,
but you were waiting for a visa. This is
yeah.
August or April 2020 or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. How long did it take? Now, because you're like on paper and by your life, you're Australian, right?
Yeah.
Because Indians, you're not allowed to have dual passports, I believe. So you're Australian, but it says country of origin, so you still have to apply for a visa. Firstly, how fun was the Pakistan visa application process?
I got it in 3 days or 4 days. It
What?
was really quick. I applied online like any other Australian would. I had like, at university, I had a lot of Pakistani friends. So I had one of
Right.
them like he'd like to visit and see these sites, and that's it. I kind of got it really. I thought it would be a really drawn out process. In fact, when that podcast happened, I had already had one Pakistani visa. It's just that because of I don't know what it was. Maybe it was like first wave COVID, or
Right. Right.
the border got closed and I wasn't able to go. Um, so then the year after I reapplied and I got it just as kind of quick. It would have. if I was an Indian citizen, it would have been a really laborious process.
Right.
And I likely wouldn't have got it given the health situation and the political
Hmm.
situation. But,
Hmm.
yeah, it was much easier than I expected. I psyched myself out into not applying until I had everything kind of lined up. But I now, like if my friends are in Karachi in January, they're like, "You want to come hang out with us?" Like I'm not even thinking about like planning references 3 months in advance. So I'll apply and it should all be fine.
Oh, great.
Um, yeah,
Okay.
and that's like Indian origin foreigners, because India doesn't allow dual citizenship, or else I would suspect that Pakistan would make dual citizens apply on their Indian passport and not their foreign
That would
passport.
make sense. Yeah.
Because India doesn't allow dual citizenship, you can it's easier to get a visa. Whereas on the Indian side, even if you're like an American Pakistani, you have to apply on your Pakistani passport.
Yeah. 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 Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Okay. So if
Yeah,
I want to go and if I have, well, I currently just have the Pakistani passport, but if I
yeah,
in the future get another one, I'll have to use either give up my Pakistani passport so it's not an option
yeah.
or, okay.
And if you give up your Pakistani passport, we like welcome you in with open arms. It's really strange, the whole like my personal belief is I think you can solve the whole India-Pakistan conflict by just giving tourist visas. I think
Sure.
that
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember in the early 2000s when I was in Pakistan, there
Yeah.
was a fair bit, this is before obviously the Mumbai attacks, there was a
Yeah.
fair bit of people coming from India. And I don't know if people were going to Pakistan, to India.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously, because whenever Pakistan's under military rule, relations
Mm,
with India often improve,
mm,
which is weird. But
yeah.
yeah, so this is so that wasn't when you went to your village. Did you go? You went to Bela, was it?
Yeah, Bela. I didn't go to Dera Ghazi Khan
Okay.
because there's a nuclear reactor near Dera Ghazi Khan.
Yes,
And
foreigners are not allowed. Yeah.
yeah, just the week before I went, like I think some Swedish woman had been picked up and no one knew where she was, and I thought maybe this is not the best idea.
Yeah.
So, and it's like near Balochistan, like yeah, not a good idea basically from Indian origin near that area. So I just went to Bela. Yeah.
So was
So
that your first time in Pakistan?
yeah, it was my first time in Pakistan. Yeah.
Okay. Um, how how did you? I'm assuming you've written about this, but for the purposes of the episode, um, what was the plan when you went there, and how did that pan out?
Like to Pakistan?
Bela specifically.
Oh, no, specifically to my village.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I'd done my research into like where it was. It's very isolated. It's more like a hamlet than a village. It's just all these hills. Maybe like the kind of villages they describe more like they're like I forgot the exact there's a phrase, but certain villages in rural India, rural Pakistan, you don't describe by population. You describe by how many kitchens there are.
Right.
In
Sure. Sure.
yeah, one of those kinds of villages. And I've just heard the story about this Muslim family that saved my grandfather's life,
Yep.
and so I didn't expect to meet them, but then when I found the village was that small, I said, maybe some of them are still around. So I bought this box of mithai, and I thought, I'll just go there and show up and see what happens. And I was with Sam. I was with my best Ani. So my best friend in Melbourne was from Lahore.
Hmm.
So he lives in Islamabad, and we kind of went together. Um, and yeah, it was because my Nana always said like, oh, it's like near Attock because like the whole area was called Campbellpur, which then became Attock. Was renamed. It ended up being quite far from Attock. It was another 2 hours.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So that was a bit of a hiccup. It was like, where are you taking me, man? Like, come on. how, how am I gonna drive up those rocks? No one drives here. No one's heard
Yeah.
of this. Yeah.
Um,
Um,
and then because like a few of the stories that you mentioned, like there was the family that lived opposite a mandir and they had moved to, I think they would move. This was India, so they moved to Pakistan, and there was a Hanif
Yeah,
family, and nobody remembered. And you were just asking people, like, all right, we have the Mandir, that should be
yeah,
the house. Let's just drop their name and see if anyone remembers.
yeah.
Um, was it a similar sort of situation? Did you have somebody in Bela where you're like, we have to find this guy, or just
No, no. I think it was much easier to find this family in Bela than it was finding the Pandit family that remembered. She's passed away now, but Dr. Siddiqui.
yeah?
Her maiden name was Hanif.
Hmm.
Um, her house didn't exist, but the mandir still existed.
Right.
So when we were looking, we're like, oh, was there like a big block here of kind of describing her house, and then obviously went into the mandir. It was
Hmm.
very like this old pujari who remembered that family. He's like, yeah, we knew the Hanifs. Like, you're at the right spot. So then that's when we reconnected them. So that was super special. Um, Lucknow is quite big. The Bela is really small. So the first person I met was some old woman walking down in the village. And I was like, this is a story. And I need to meet with the Nambardar because, Nana's like, the village is Nambardar, their family saved us.
Hmm.
And so I was like, have you heard of the Nambardar? And like, this is such a small village. The family's still called like the Nambardar, like
Right.
this, it's just kind of gone down. It hasn't been that long if you think about it, two
Hmm.
generations.
2 generations. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so she directed me to, their house, and I met like the son of the man who saved my grandfather's life, and we had that. Like, gave him the box of mithai, and he told me about. He was like 3 years old at the time. It was quite like touching because I had heard the story, and my mom had heard the story since we were like kids, of this Nambardar and who like kind of saved our lives and hid us in
Hmm.
his barn, and I was like telling him the story, and he's like, "Yeah, that's my dad you're talking about," because I've heard the story a million times as well.
Oh, he was
Um, and-
telling his son that I saved this guy.
yeah,
Yeah, sure, sure.
yeah. So he was like, "Come, let me show you where your old like house was." It was just a plot of land now. It was still overlooking like, and it matched my nana's descriptions perfectly because he was like, "Oh, there was like Darya was there, and then like there was a hill just across, and we're
Yeah.
facing masjid. The masjid was still there, so like it all checked out,
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, to the point where the nickname for the hill, because I just asked someone, I was like, "Oh, what's that hill over there?" And there's like they say that's Bolni Wali Daddi. And
Wow.
my nana would say, as kids we'd go out the house and we'd like shout words at the hill, and it would echo back to us. And
Right.
my nana still he says like Daddi, he doesn't say Pahar. So
Right.
for them to say, oh, it's Bolni Wali Daddi, like, it's like, okay, this is the right place. We found
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, is your nana still alive?
Yeah. Yeah. He's still
Okay.
around.
So
Yeah.
were you able to do the VR connection with him then?
No, we haven't actually shown him because I haven't been able to go back to India since.
Right.
So I'm going back in a couple months to show the VR experience. But he's seen all the photos and he's spoken to the Nambardar's family, and we've done
Okay.
that kind of connection. And in fact, like different generations of the family now, I gave him like my Mamu connected with the Nambardar's son and like told my mother up. And, it's just kind of like I was invited to a wedding there.
Oh,
I
nice.
couldn't but it was just more like, oh, you're like our long lost Hindu brothers, like come
Yeah.
back. This is your village, you can stay as long as you want. So next time I go, I might stay for, a little bit longer. Because
Do you
I had to leave the
do
same
you
day.
do you have a next time visit planned as of
Yeah,
now?
I'm thinking of coming in January.
Okay. Okay.
Um because we're like, still working on some of the films there.
Mm.
Um yeah, let's see where it ends up. Because I need to go to Delhi in December. So while I'm there I may as well.
Do you think it'll be easy to make the flight over from India? Are those still operational?
It depends on Corona more so than
Okay.
politics. So
Okay.
there's no fight between India and Pakistan in general.
Yeah.
Usually you can cross the Wagah, you just walk
Oh,
across.
okay.
Uh, but last time because of Corona, we had to go Delhi to Dubai, Dubai to Faisalabad, Faisalabad to Lahore. Like it was a yeah trek. I was just thinking you could drive it take like 5 hours.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. There was an educational aspect also to Project Dastan where one of the purposes was sort of spreading the connection that you guys were, the connections you were reforging in a way to Was it like the curriculum or just people at large?
Yeah, so what we're doing at the moment is we've now, our original goal was 75 stories before the
Mm,
70th
yeah.
anniversary. COVID obviously made that impossible. Like we couldn't film for like a whole year. So we've done around 20, 25 stories now, and that's just basically a wrap with that.
Okay.
Um, because the whole project is kind of volunteer run, it's public funded, so there's only a certain amount of stories we can do before we run out of the resources.
Yeah.
But what we are doing with the stories we've collected is we're making one animated virtual reality
Hmm.
experience called Child of Empire, where you can kind of experience the migration, and half of the story is from like an Indian perspective, half is from a Pakistani perspective. I mean, actually, more to describe that half of it is from like a 19 wars from a 1947 Muslim perspective, and they migrated in opposite directions. Um, Almost the whole point of the story is before these nationalisms came into play, what did the children of the time feel about
Yeah. Yeah.
cell conflict? Um, so that's nearly done. That'll be out like be finished in a month and a bit, and then we'll do like a kind of a worldwide museum tour and gallery tour where people can come.
Yeah.
You know, these experiences for the Hindu one is like it's literally my grandfather's experience, and the Pakistani side, there's a man called Iqbaluddin Ahmad. You know, he actually lives in London, but his story is the one we've kind of put into that counterpart. Um, and then we have an animated series called Lost Migrations, which is where National Geographic got involved. So
Yeah.
originally, like the idea was that we had filmed a lot of stories in kind of Punjab, Bengal. I mean, obviously, there's the areas that were like directly, you know, uh, Punjab, Bengal, and I mean Kashmir is still like level, but those are the two princely states that were actually partitioned. The rest of the princely states' boundaries were just kind of
Yeah.
they were already there. I mean, you could cross freely between them, but the boundaries technically, were already there. They just kind of one way. So we found that all like a lot of our stories were around these two areas, but that we weren't actually we needed to be a bit more diverse. Like, there was Balochi stories, there was
Mm.
like Sindhi stories, there was Kashmiri stories, and on the eastern front, Tripura had stories, and Mizoram had Assam, and south of India, Tamil Nadu had stories, Karachi had stories. So we were like, let's do like a mini series of 10 diverse like partition narratives. And so we pitched National Geographic uh, last March, and then we got the grant, and then COVID hit. So okay, we still want to make use of this money, and so we said let's animate, and we'll make it fiction because we don't have time to find like
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then we, let's do one story about women, one story about Tamil communities who came from like Burma and Singapore and Malaysia, and these are all like kind of like part of the Raj, and like Burma was part of the Raj. And so like, there's Tamil communities at partition, like when the Japanese were
Yeah.
that area, and they're moving to places like Tamil Nadu. So like that story is not seen as a partition story, and it should be seen as a partition story because
Yeah.
it's this breakup of the Raj. And then we're doing one story on like bureaucracy and statelessness and kind of Appa meets Manto, like, that kind of narrative. Um, so yeah, it was COVID that made us change from the mini doc series to this fictional animated series, but it's ended up being a blessing in disguise because they look beautiful, and obviously like it's fictional, we have a lot more kind of room to
Yeah.
play with, and then the British Council supported a couple more episodes on that. So we have one episode being made in Bangalore, two are being made in Lahore. Interestingly, we have the Pakistani studios making the stories that are from South India, and then
Oh.
the Indian studio is making the stories that are set in Rawalpindi and Peshawar. And so we're trying to, and we've asked like the studios to kind of do music for each other. And so we're really trying to get them to collaborate because, and think outside that kind of national narrative. And like, that's the whole point of this project. Uh, it's to put a question mark against the concept of national history.
Mm.
Because
Mm.
history is, I mean, in principle, history is just what happened. Obviously, we never get to that because every retelling is subjective
Yeah.
and has perspective. Um, but particularly national histories in the case of nations that have only been around for two generations, we're trying to put a question mark next to that and kind of show stories that don't fit into those boxes cleanly.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Is there so what's how wide do you think the reach of these details will be? Because like
Uh,
on the face of it, like from a Pakistani perspective, a lot of
yeah.
this is on the internet. Pakistan doesn't have any. Is the museum tour going to? Are there any museums in Pakistan where this could be?
Yeah, we're still like trying to finalize those relationships.
Right.
So the aim is to tour around India, Pakistan, and the UK at a
Mm.
minimum. And of course, we'd like to do like Dubai and Canada where there's huge like
DC
population
populations, yeah.
relations. But you know that's something that's like quite a lot of my workload at the moment is less these VR tours and more like let's get these stories out now.
Mm.
So especially because next year is 75 for both countries.
Yeah.
So that's like kind of when we want to get this out there.
Mm.
You
Do
know,
you
put it on
think
a streaming platform or something. Yeah.
is there? I think I think this was asked in the previous podcast episode also. Is there any backlash that you've received? Not from the you mentioned that governments aren't really pushing it because you guys are trying to be as uh what was there was a reason that you mentioned why the governments weren't as anti
Yeah.
as someone would expect.
Governments are not so anti. I'm hoping that these stories, when they come out, when we exhibit, when we premiere, because so far it's just been like, oh, this like man wants to see a Hindu temple that's in Pakistan. Of course, like the Indian government loves that, but we're going and filming this VR experience. And same for like this, you know, he wants to see some mosque, wants to see his school. Like,
Yeah.
no one in their right mind would have like a problem to that because that in itself is like, I mean, I guess the point of that was one to like do it for the, it was just kind of nostalgia and you know that kind of healing. It was a healing thing rather than a political statement.
Mm.
um and even the kind of mild political statement that is inevitably formed by something like a peace building mission is like everyone can tolerate, you know, these kids and they're going out there and they're making films. Like when
Right.
we come up with these features, they're not expressly political, they're still formed on these oral history, but it's almost like each government will love half of the story.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be the challenge, you know, like, of course, your half of the story you're going to love because that kind of, this validates everything that we've always said. But the whole point of all of these four films, Child of Empire and the three Lost Migration films, was that um, they don't fit into these boxes. And so like they kind of, we want to have people confront, not only like validate their experiences and also confront like the kind of narrow-minded view that comes out of only having heard your own story over and
That's
over.
yeah, that's what I was thinking because not just from the government thing, but a lot of people have invested a lot of their time and experience and belief into the boxes, as it were. That the
Yeah,
boxes are where the right information is, and this, which is outside of that experience, is surely propaganda. I mean, I know
yeah,
people in Pakistan who would very easily fall all the way into those boxes
yeah,
and
and then
believe it's
vice
right.
versa.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, do you have? I'm assuming you haven't encountered much of that as of now, but
yeah,
do you expect you might, or do you think it'll
yeah.
be?
I think we might, you know, like uh like people are, especially these days, given the political
Mhm.
situation, but these like this, like anti-national has become a very popular word to like throw around. So um yeah, but that's not something that deters us.
Right.
You know? Like we're not here like trying to push a particular view.
Mhm.
Like we're just showing what happens when these boxes collide, you know. And there are stories that don't neatly fit. And so it's like almost what Manto said. It's like if you have a problem with my stories, then like my stories just reflect society, you know.
Mm.
Society is the thing you have a problem with. Don't blame me, like I'm just an author. And I think what we're trying to do is like trying to pick out these stories that have been forgotten by history, and they're like deliberately forgotten. It's like it's that collective amnesia that we don't want to talk about it because it doesn't fit our narrative. And if we learned about this, then the whole puzzle, like the whole castle that we've built up, might be undermined.
Mm.
Um, and if that infuriates people, then like so be it, because yeah,
Sam mentioned in that episode there's sort of like a countdown ongoing as to how long this project can keep getting stories because the people who are giving the stories are very old.
yeah.
Sort of as the flip side to that, do you think that there is a countdown also running as a result of the interest that people will have? Like you and me were
I
millennials,
think
I'm assuming.
I think the interest is increasing.
Oh, it's increasing. Okay.
Yeah, and it's because of this like kind of where is my identity? Where do I come from? This is
Right.
such like it's such a
But surely that's like diaspora
great.
only.
Uh, I mean, okay, yeah, I can speak on behalf of diaspora in that sense. I think
Yeah.
there's a big kind of cultural movement now to be like, I'm gonna find my roots,
Yeah.
and I think that's why this project has got a lot of experience, like kind of how do I say it, um, runway,
Yeah.
because it wasn't necessarily the grandparents reaching out to us; it was their grandchildren on Instagram saying, "I really want to show my nanny her house in like Rawalpindi. Like, can you go out there with a camera?"
Hmm.
Um,
I'm thinking
yeah,
in terms of like people who have lived their entire lives in India or
yeah.
Pakistan, when their grandparents pass away, and then when there's nobody who has lived that experience, do you
Yeah.
think we'll just be like, yeah, whatever? I mean, it happened like too long ago for the diaspora. It'll still be
Hmm.
relevant because we're removed from the immediate situation.
Yeah.
And, there's a bit of like not fitting into wherever we are, which
Yeah.
again, maybe in a couple generations will go away.
Yeah.
Um, but like,
Yeah.
will these stories hold significantly less meaning one generation down, like whatever comes after Gen Z?
It might. And that's like something that's kind of scary because these people who, when they pass away, they're the ones who remembered a life before those identities were created. And so there's nothing wrong with patriotism or having an identity and being proud of it. But I think it's equally as important to understand like the ideological limitations that necessarily puts onto you,
Yeah.
Oh, exactly what we were talking about earlier. A real Indian should dot 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 dot. A
Yeah.
real Pakistani should dot dot dot. And when this generation passes away, we will lose the people who remembered a time where there was no such thing as a real Indian or a real Pakistani. And that that's a cultural loss. And it's important for people to kind of keep talking about that
Mm.
because if we don't, then we get caught in these like normative and shoulds you know, and that is always, you know, maybe that's just my perspective, but I think, a world dominated by shoulds is like not a very nice place to live.
Yeah. Yeah. Because who's deciding what the
Yeah.
shoulds are?
Yeah.
Sorry, I should have asked this before. How did you get into photography? This is like a
Um,
very early in
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
discussion
yeah.
question.
Um, I used to like go for walks around my house in like Melbourne, and my dad had the camera. He would like take it, go for walks.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was also really obsessed with this like channel, Singaporean photography channel called Digital Rev.
Yes,
Because
with Kai Wong and Locke,
yeah,
who
yeah,
are both
yeah.
in London now.
They're both in London, yeah. But I
Yeah.
was like a gadgety guy, so I was always like looking up reviews for the latest cameras, and
Of course,
yeah,
you have to. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of got into it, and then yeah, I don't think I was like obviously I still don't consider myself like a professional photographer or a
Okay.
journalist. Like I'm trying to, get more into documentary film and make that like a profession. Um, uh, but it's always been like a hobby and something I
Yeah.
really enjoy doing. Yeah.
So then, uh, what do you think the future is for your pursuits? Like, does Project Dastan have an end date after which something new will begin, or do you
I
think
think
the
I think the team is quite like, we feel like it's like a natural close to the project once this tour completes and we've, the stories are out there and then people can watch it. And that will probably be next August
Hmm.
when we do it. And whenever that tour lasts until, I think, will be like a natural kind of fitting conclusion. But I mean, everyone involved with the project, I mean, at least the three of us, Sabia, Sam, and I, have all kind of taken that, like our research and our
Sorry, it's a
experience.
really stupid thing to say. I just realized
Yeah,
all your names start with S.
yeah, yeah. Um, that is true. And like kind of gone with it. So Sadia is now doing a PhD at Warwick. She's doing
Mhm.
it in international relations. Sam, as you know, is writing a book on partition at the moment. So he's really taken that lost migrations idea where when we were initially researching for those like stories in Tripura or like you know Balochi stories and so on and so forth. He's gone and like really deep in on that and
Mm.
load of research. And now that like kind of the central idea of his book is the story of like five partitions, and it wasn't just
Yeah.
Punjab, that not just shaping India Pakistan, but really shaping world politics and the way it had a much bigger ripple effect than we kind of imagined. Um, and yet personally, I'm trying to go into documentary film and just continue telling more stories and kind of fallen in love with this process.
In the partition India Pakistan realm of things, or not necessarily?
Who knows?
Okay. Okay.
Who knows
Right.
where- yeah. Um, yeah, obviously I'm really attached to South Asia. I think there's a wealth of stories.
Mm.
But and also I think that I'd like to see storytelling and journalism move in a direction where people from that community tell their own stories. Um, kind of pushing against this parachute journalism of like,
Mm.
you know, foreign correspondents who have never been to an area come and like, report for a bit, and then they have translators and drivers and all
Yeah.
of that. I wouldn't want to go and replicate that in an area I'm not from, because I think you lose like such a a detail to the story if you haven't grown up in it. Sometimes it's good to have like a third, an outsider's perspective, but I don't think news and storytelling should be driven by the outsider's perspective. Um, so that's why if I did focus, I'd love to do like more work in South Asia.
Mm.
Um, and I think there's a new, as I said, this diaspora thing. I think there's a new culture of um, people. If I can't speak on behalf of someone who's grown up in India, Pakistan their entire life, but I feel like I can speak on behalf of diaspora more.
Mm.
Um, and so I think there's a lot of stories to be covered there as well.
Yeah.
Um, wherever they are. Yeah.
Because I mean, for sure, you must have. You said your best friend was from Lahore, growing up in Australia. Still have tons of friends from India from when I
Yeah.
was growing up in Dubai. The differences abroad are not as delineated, and the separations aren't as manifest as they sort of have to be when you're
Yeah.
living in India and Pakistan. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that's also why the interest continues and persists.
Yeah, I think because you don't like that's one of the reasons I said like a tourist visa is such a
Mm.
uh, would be such a step in the positive direction because it's about bringing people together. It's about facilitating conversations where you can respectfully disagree. It's very easy over YouTube comments or like via newspapers to be
Yeah.
like, oh, no, all of you are fascists. uh, it's much harder to do that when it's your friend and they're like kind of, this is
Yeah.
actually I believe, and then you have that kind of conversation and you realize actually, maybe like we might believe in different things, but actually we probably believe in those different things for very similar reasons.
Yeah. 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 For sure.
Similar,
For sure.
similar trauma that's kind of perpetuating each narrative. So that's yeah, that's true. I think
Mm.
like
And it is.
diaspora has been good for that. You always like, I mean, when I come back to India, there's a lot of things I've missed out on But there's also a wealth of knowledge and culture, and I think diaspora really needs to kind of understand this, that yeah, we've like missed out on, you know, there's a lot of things that we feel disconnected to, you know, maybe our language isn't as good as, you know, our cousins, or, you know, we can't cook as well. I think that's a big thing. I think, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
we really
yeah.
can't cook as well. But like we have a very different, like we've got the, you know, I'm not gonna say like privilege. I'm going to say it's like a different experience of
Mm,
being able to meet like Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and actually people from much, you know, like forget South Asia, like the rest of the world.
yeah,
Um, that's like, it's kind of mind-boggling when most like people in India and Pakistan have never met an Indian or like someone from the other side of the border.
yeah.
We have that
5 hours away, like you said.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, that is something that's really special. And like, I think diaspora should feel like kind of proud of that. You know, this is like something I have, you know, this is my culture where I can have chai with the Pakistani and
I
I don't do
once
that in Delhi, you know?
I was saying that thing, about how when you go to Pakistan, like I don't really feel at home. And when I go to Dubai, it's the same. It's just places I lived. And then this European colleague of mine, she's like, "Oh yeah, but that means you're a citizen of the world." I'm like, "Man, shut up. Look at my face."
My European friends talk to me about this all the time. You know, they're like Spanish people don't hop on about how Spanish, you know, like how if they're living like when my German friends were saying this to me the other day. I don't know how, you know, widespread this phenomenon is, if it's just his personal opinion. So caveat
Sure,
with this.
sure.
But he was saying that, you know, Spanish people in Germany are not going on about how Spanish they are all the time, because like they can literally just like kind of go back, like it's
Yeah.
just going for a holiday, you know. Um, I think that identities have become strengthened because of the like how difficult it is to travel between these countries, how hard it is for, and that is completely like the history of colonialism, like kind of summed up, which results in these identities being strengthened. So it's not like Europeans are like naturally more progressive or like, you know,
Yeah.
inherently or like some kind of, you know, they're more advanced. It's just more like colonialism has led to these borders being stronger. It's led to people in general being poorer, which leads to more fundamentalist ways of thinking, like just naturally.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like an easy chain
yeah,
reaction to follow.
it's a chain reaction. Um, so yeah, it's not. This is where like I think um, you know, like this whole growing up in Australia and being diaspora, one of the things I think I've really kind of been blessed as a result is you start to see that a lot of the things that we say is like Indian culture or Pakistani culture, and very regressive things sometimes that we kind of claim as our own. These aren't like, these are the byproducts of colonialism.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, if you look back in history, like we weren't always so angry.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we weren't always so like prescriptive as to, you know, what we think other people should be like as well. Um, colonialism had a lot to play in developing those hardline identities.
Yeah, like the biggest, and I feel nervous saying this, even though I don't live in Pakistan, but I will visit. But like the blasphemy law, death for blasphemy, is a huge thing in Pakistan. Very argued on, should it be there, should not be there. And
Yeah,
there's like a strong amount of research that says that the British introduced it. And
yeah,
like we never had it. And then in
um,
18 something, it was a thing. And before that, it didn't exist as much. But then
yeah.
apparently Allama Iqbal was a fan of it, and that's its own can of worms. But um, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
And
this whole thing around like, you know, the British introduced this, British introduced that. Uh, I think the way I like I've seen it from my readings, it's been like not necessarily. So there's a lot of ills in our society. So I don't want to blame it as like they did it.
yeah,
Um, we don't have these problems. It's more that uh, problems were exacerbated and harnessed by the
right.
British to
That's better.
achieve that.
Yeah.
So like, especially things like caste. You know, there's a very big revisionist argument in India that caste was a British/Portuguese invention,
Okay.
and like it's not historically true. Like caste existed before the British arrived, and the argument used here is that the word caste is like a Latin, like comes from like a romantic language, and it's the Portuguese. I mean, call it whatever you want. We had our own words for it, like
Right,
before, you
right.
know. Um, so it's not like these ills like were just dropped by colonizers, but like uh, so we have to take some level of responsibility.
Yeah,
But they were also harnessed and used to a way to make them even deeper and like cement those cleavages. And I think that's the danger of colonialism, that maybe had these societies progressed, actually we don't know what, I don't want to engage in speculation,
yeah,
but like would these cleavages and identities and social ills be as severe as they are today had colonizers not used them for their own political gain? Open question, but like I'd like to hope that they would have, like they would have kind of, we would have found a way of like dealing with that ourselves. um yeah, I
um
hope that, but sometimes I look at like what's happening and I think,
this is
yeah.
always happening. um is there anything else that you really feel is important about the work that you guys are doing with, in your private capacity, Project Dastan, that I have not picked up or we haven't discussed?
No, I think we've really gone over a lot of why we've, kind of invested 3 years
Yeah,
into
yeah,
this.
yeah.
Um, yeah, we hope it like get. I don't want to say I hope it has an impact. I'm saying I hope like, just get people to think.
Yeah.
You know, I was in. I'll tell you a really funny story. I was in Rawalpindi,
Mm.
and I was at like a dinner party, and it was a very nice house. Actually, I found out later that it was actually owned by a Hindu pre-partition, a family that had left, but very really beautiful house. And I was sitting there, I was just like having dinner with my friends, and one of the friends' mothers came, and she was at the dinner party, and she was talking to me about how my experience as an Indian being in Pakistan. And keep in mind, I had not experienced one form of like any sort of negativity. In fact, I was like welcomed really with like open arms,
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, like brother, I must show you around this place. Like, oh, I've always wanted to meet India. I love Bollywood, like, all of
Right,
this.
right, right.
And when I and then I was in kind of like a very high society. This was kind of a bit of a high society party. And these are the kinds of people that you'd expect to be the most welcoming because they're the most well read and they're the most educated and they've already met Indians. These aren't the
Yeah.
people who they've grown up outside and they've come back to us. I don't know what it was, but she was hopping on about like Kama Sutra and like sex
What?
statue temples and like she was like, oh, like one thing Jinnah did really good for us is that he like like our women would have been so deviant had they, and I was like, why do
Wow.
why am I like I feel like I'm being accused of something that like one is inaccurate,
Yeah.
like Kama Sutra, like I think it's beautiful because it's about like worshipping sex as a way of, like prayer for the divine. So one, that's not even an accurate way of portraying it. And secondly, just because I come from India doesn't mean I just speak on behalf of like,
You should go and fix it now. She's told
yeah.
you what to do.
Uh, but and then she says something like beta, like what would you like for dinner? I don't know if you've had this before, but we have this dish in Pakistan called dal chawal. And I
What?
just said, Auntie, like, what are you smoking? Like, come on. So I, I just think we want to have less conversations like that,
Yeah, 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 for
Or like
sure.
people to kind of think, these are our similarities, these are differences, and these are the ways that politics have encouraged those differences while making us forget about our similarities.
Mm.
Um, I hope that is what people come away with.
I'm really happy that, I mean, it's unfortunate that it happened, but I find this story super, super amazing. Have you heard about Dal Chawal? That's
Have
so
you heard
perfect.
about that? Yeah. Um, yeah. I think in one of the differences I did find between India and Pakistan is that it's happening actually less in India now, but the cultural like the cultural visibility of Islam is more in India than the cultural visibility of Hinduism in Pakistan. And so,
How do you mean?
as in, like, you do have a sense that like Indians will know more about like Eid because it's just
Oh, right.
there's just more Muslims in India than there are Hindus in
Sure.
Pakistan.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
not like it's not like a we're inherent like we're like more progressive. It's not
No,
like
no,
that at
no.
all.
I mean, it makes
But
sense.
there are more Muslims, so there's that more a little bit of like you can go down the street. There is a gurdwara, there's a mosque, and there's a temple. Like um, that, I think is like eroding sadly. You know,
Oh, for
um,
sure. Like if we have
yeah,
progressed to the
yeah,
point where we are now focusing our discrimination towards Muslim minorities, that means that the other religions have been dealt with. And
yeah,
so that's yeah, 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 that's
yeah.
and that really feeds into the sort of monoculture kind of thing in Pakistan, that it's also like, we're all Muslim, and Muslim is also Sunni, and we're also mainly Punjabi, Pakistani. That's the vibe. And you know, that for sure is a thing. Like, I think I have met in all my like 10 years. I went to high school, I did my ACCA, my 10 years in Pakistan, 2000 to 2010. I have met in my life maybe three Hindus from
Yeah,
Pakistan.
yeah,
It's just not a thing.
yeah.
And
It's not, yeah. Whereas I'd say like nearly everyone in India would know an Indian Muslim. Like that's
yeah,
kind of yeah.
yeah,
It's just demographics, population.
yeah.
Um, uh, and there is like a eroding but dying push from the Indian left to really amplify that as much as possible,
Oh,
which I'm seeing in Pakistan as well. To be honest, like some of my friends have been doing like incredible work. Like I don't know if you know Anam Zakaria, Harun Khalid. Like they've been working on like this kind of
mhm.
supporting minorities. What was that? At Peshawar, I saw it a lot. Peshawar had this kind of brotherly feel in
Okay.
a way that like I so many like Sikhs were very visible.
Right, right.
Yeah. So even more so than Lahore. I thought in Lahore I'd see a lot of Sikhs. I did see Sikhs around the Ranjit Singh, like
Okay.
the Samaj Ranjit Singh, but in Peshawar it was like, wow, there's a lot of Sikhs here, and um, I did really like that about being in Peshawar. I felt like
I
it was a little bit.
mean, if I was being cynical, I would say that of the other non-Muslim religions,
Mm,
it's really just the Hindus that Pakistani culture has a problem with, like the national thing, because Hindustan and Muslims and major similar vibes, and Sikhs in India have had some tensions of their own. So we're like, yeah, yeah, these guys are with us.
yeah,
That sort
yeah,
of thing could be there. Christians are also very few, and most of the Christians I've met in Pakistan are of a significantly lower than average socioeconomic class, and sort of, you know, kept at that level and considered in like modern just social culture to be just related to that level. Like if we had a caste system, I mean, it would be, yeah, Christians would be
yeah.
not doing very well in.
But actually, there is like reports on like uh, on how past boundaries from before conversion to Islam or Christianity
Mhm.
are still practiced, and
Yep.
there are like which is really sad. And I was thinking, yeah, this whole idea that like what this kind of shows, at least for me, is that it's like really all like social political at the end of the day, very economic. So you'll hear a lot of people in India be like, Muslims are just like they don't get educated, they don't get their women educated, like they're always like, you know, and so there's a lot of like that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Even from people who are like progressive and well read and and like my natural thing to say there is if you like Hindus in general, like, um, are, socioeconomically better off in India. And the easiest way to figure out that that's not about religion and it's about economics is if you look at what's happening in Pakistan, it's like that is reversed.
Yeah, fully.
Um, and that just kind of shows like, yeah, it's not about religion at the end of the day. It's about state control and, state definitions of what constitutes Indian and Pakistani, and then 73 years can lead to lots of class differences.
Yeah, especially if you make an effort, which at least definitely on our side, people have made an effort.
Yeah. It doesn't happen naturally. This is kind of.
Yeah. I think I should let you go, because this has been great, but I asked for an hour and I'm 20 minutes up, and also I have to put this up tomorrow, so so I have like a high-speed edit session due. Before we go, anything else? Anything I've left out that you want to mention? I'm gonna put like a ton of links in the thing.
Just keep an eye out for these episodes. They're coming out soon. And Child of Empire, when it comes and takes its tour around Pakistan. Actually, if you have Indian listeners, when it comes to India as well. So
we do. I've been scheming and getting as many Indian guests as I can, just so All right, man, Sparsh. It's been great, and I think if you're up for it, we'll talk again as soon as something else happens. Hopefully positive. If I come by London, which is not that far, I might be awkward and ask to meet up. Okay, just telling you on the air. All right, man, I'm gonna stop recording. TBR board, the links, everything as usual. Thanks for listening, and do check out the links. It's more important than anything else in the description. All right, bye everyone.